Well, I think I'm going to get started here. Uh, in the email that I sent out that has the Zoom link on it, there's a more detailed uh, bio for Dr. Fruehauf, who's going to be presenting to us today. But he's going to talk about the Chinese medicine and how that affects neurodegenerative diseases. And he has many decades worth of experience. So I'm really looking forward to his presentation. I had to teach myself Oriental medicine because I did it while I was in medical school. And so I just read books and applied what I learned and got some results. And so it is possible. It sure is hard to learn how to do Chinese pulse taking on your own, though. It would have been helpful to have somebody to hold my hand for that. And but I did get an electroacupressure device and started doing electroacupuncture back there in those days. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Let me go over here. Make sure Dr. Fruehauf's still on. That's good. Okay, so Dr. Fruehauf, are you ready to share your screen and educate us?
Yes, absolutely. Should I start doing that or I will, here we go. All right. Hopefully you can all see this.
Yeah, full screen. It's perfect.
All right. Yes, I have first of all, thank you so very much, Dr. Cowden and team, for inviting me. It's an absolute honor to be here with you from all kinds of different states and even all over the world. Yeah, since I'll be presenting about my specialty, you can see here that I'm not an MD. I'm came a little bit here to the field of medicine like virgin to child by being trained in Chinese literature originally, even though my family they were all MDs in Europe. But then because of personal illness and I went back to China for another few years of training in Chinese medicine, been working in that field for 35 years. So that is of course, a licensed profession, also with doctoral degrees nowadays. But I will be explaining everything from the Chinese medicine uh, rather than a Western medicine perspective, like what our approach is to neurodegenerative diseases. Um, since I understand that your panel specializes in ALS, which is truly one of the most difficult diseases to treat, we know that there have been quite a few studies in recent years that herbs, which that's my personal specialty, Chinese medicine, we hear a lot about acupuncture, but it is really primarily in China itself about use of herbs. Uh, Ayurvedic herbs, Western herbs, Chinese herbs seem to be working well for ALS. Of course, these kind of pictures are very often oversimplified, like because the ginseng and the curcumin, it is much Chinese medicine has much more sophisticated ways of approaching that. But there's also been, was happy to see that there have been studies out there that for Chinese medicine, Chinese herbal medicine specifically, that there is not only evidence that Chinese medicine works in an evidence-based manner for ALS, uh, making it less of a suffering type of disease, but also that long-term treatment, which is of course important, is safe and can be undertaken simultaneously to whatever Western medicine standard of care modalities are available. First of all, since we all know, especially outside of the field of Chinese Western medicine, there is always everybody has their own style of practicing medicine. With it comes certain biases. So this is sort of like my personal family background, and with it comes certain biases. I was born in Germany. Here's a picture on the right from 1930 with my father as a little baby in the arms of my grandfather. They were both MDs in the nature cure tradition. And my great grandfather on the very right, he was a shoemaker who trained with the founder really of the European nature cure movement of the 1890s, Sebastian Kneipp, who was really a priest, but he kind of initiated this kind of hydrotherapy craze, etc., that then really overtook Germany, particularly during the 1920s. Hermann Hesse, famous author, participated in that, and so my grandfather and father, they were very much steeped in that. My grandfather was primarily a homeopath. But he was a very old school MD who believed like if you would get an X-ray, your descendants would still have to suffer from that 300 years later, and who would take his rheumatoid arthritis patients into the forest, have them drop their pants and sit in the anthill. This is not 1,000 years ago, mind you, but this is only 50 to 60 years ago when he was still alive and practicing. This was he was running one of the largest private uh, hospitals in Germany that exclusively used homeopathic remedies, some of which that he manufactured himself. I myself, as a sinologist, I went to China first in 1982 as a 21-year-old kid, and this was China looked like North Korea now. Like this was Shanghai, which is now a gleaming city, kind of looked like this. This here was what the river looked like. Look at the skyline here, because the next picture we'll see 30 some years later you have a city of 10 million there. This is Pudong, which is a part of Shanghai now where the airport is. It's crazy the speed of development in China. At that point, there were only 100 foreigners in Shanghai. Before the pandemic, we had 250,000. So everybody, nobody had seen foreigners, and immediately we would attract like people crowding around us. It was a very special time, the early 1980s, when the wall had just come down and foreigners were allowed in again. At the end, once I had my PhD from the University of Chicago in cynology, I got very sick. I got diagnosed with testicular cancer. That kind of prompted me to not accept the first job that came along as a professorship in that field. I went back to China for self-healing purposes primarily, and I went to Chengdu, which is as the oldest university of traditional Chinese medicine, Chengdu University of TCM. This is their hospital here. Again, this was like in the early 90s when I stayed there in postdoctoral training to primarily for self-healing purposes, but also undertook formal training in that modality. This is what the same site looks like now. You can see the progress there in China. There are about 1.5 million licensed practitioners in the field of Chinese medicine. And universities like this, all of these buildings belong to that. Have about 40,000 students there. So it's not a small modality. Since the truly traditional way of practicing is getting forgotten in China. I went to the folk physicians in the countryside and studied with them in addition to being trained at the university. And once I came back in 1992, I established a college of classical Chinese medicine within uh, the United States' earliest university for natural medicine modalities, National University of Natural Medicine, Portland, Oregon, which is still in existence now. I retired from that teaching job 2 years ago. And then because of the crisis in and lack of, the problems with Chinese herbs quality, I found it as an herbalist, I found like I had to get directly involved in the herb trade. So 17 years ago, I founded Classical Pearls, which is an herb company that specializes in organic and wildcrafted herbs being extracted and then imported from China and packaged and tested in the United States. And I'll tell you about certain formulas that I think are most relevant for us today here for neurodegenerative diseases at the end of this presentation. Because we have 72 or maybe more even institutions that provide, that train people in 4-year programs in Chinese medicine in this country, handing out doctoral degrees in Chinese medicine. But there is very little focus on more serious kind of treatments for and meaning on the clinic. And so this is one of the latest endeavors. Dr. Cowden and Ruth and we talked about this briefly when we just came on 15 minutes ago. So we are about to move into this inpatient treatment center. It's basically my outpatient practice in Chinese herbs and acupuncture, but with some associates of mine. But we are expanding and have 5 bedrooms also available for people who can stay there for a week or longer. Uh, and that's located right here in the scenic Columbia River Gorge. And now, principles of Chinese medicine, there's a lot to say. uh, but let's focus on some important things. Number one, it is all about how everything works together as a whole. Here are starlings over Rome, about 1 million in this flocks, and not a single one of them drops out of the sky. Everybody works together, the whole herd, so to speak, or the flock here. And that's how we look at the body, is how every cell, these trillions of cells, instead of just kind of suppressing one biochemical component or so, the idea is always how can we make all systems, the neurological systems, hormonal systems, digestive systems, uh, work together in harmony. So while we have this kind of a more structural focus in regular Western medicine and specializations there in Chinese medicine, as you all know, is primarily focusing on the energy field that keeps the body alive. So this here you can study in the dead body, but Chinese medicine is interested in the processes of the living body, and there is a hierarchy of consciousness governing energy. This field you see here that then works with chakras and meridians, but in that energy field is enlivening and governing the health and the structure of the physical body. That is sort of the founding principle of this medicine. That's why sort of crossover uh, fields. It's like early on in my career, I would read books like this by Robert Becker, The Body Electric, or Fritz Albert Pop's work on biophotons, light communication in the cell. That is very much related. You know, biophysics is a field that is more related than anatomy or biochemistry to Chinese medicine. Also, modalities as sort of integrative ways to work with Chinese medicine in the modern world is thermography, for instance, like where you literally take a picture of the surface temperature of the body. And here is a patient where you can see there is a colder temperature here and here, that after an acupuncture treatment, a half an hour later, this was another picture taken. These spots have disappeared. So you can see how this energy flow, this bioelectric flow, has been enhanced by the treatment. In contrast, here we have a picture of a cancer patient where there is complete blockages of different parts of the body, particularly here in the spinal area where the spine is stuck, energy circulation is stuck there. It doesn't go up to the brain, which is important, of course, for diseases such as ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases. We are also very interested and concerned because of our focus on the bioelectrics, on the effect of artificial and ever increasing electric vibrations, and particularly cell phone towers, wireless, which from a Western perspective has a negative effect on the mitochondria. From our perspective, is significantly overlaying and negatively impacting the energy flow, not just in nature, but in the human body. You're probably familiar with this book, but for years I was struggling when people wanted more evidence and materials for that, how particularly cell phone towers and wireless uh, radiation can harm the body, the mitochondria, particularly there are lots of bad quality websites that look like conspiracy theories, but this is a very Arthur Furstenberg trained as an MD and then spent the rest of his life to research the put that training to good use to from an evidence-based perspective to collect materials that show the negative effects of all kinds of electricity, from radio waves to radar to wireless radiation, etc. And there is the most valuable part about this book is a 125-page bibliography at the end, which includes 30 years or 40 years worth of studies about the impact of electricity on our health. Another books that are sort of integrative for me are Thomas Cowan's work about water and cancer in particular, because of course this theory of structured water that Gerald Pollack with the fourth phase of water pioneered is very much compatible with Chinese medicine's view of what we call essence, which is the ability of the body to intelligently self-heal itself. And that has to do with this matrix of water that Cowan here mentions as that needs to be structured in a certain way to prevent all kinds of diseases, including cancer, but I would say also diseases like MS, Parkinson's, and ALS. So Chinese medicine looks at the body in some as a microcosm also that is related and at every point to the macrocosm. So there are in ancient medicine, as we will see, not just Chinese medicine, but also Egyptian medicine, we have 12 stellar constellations where the sun moves through. We have 12 months of the year, and we have 12 energetic meridians or functional network relay systems we call the 12 channels or 12 meridians in Chinese medicine. That cover all functions in the body, not just the liver, not just the lung, that have their own meridian. So here we can see sort of quotes that I translated from the quote unquote Bible of Chinese medicine, the Yellow Emperor's Classical Medicine, at 2000 plus years old, where, this 12-foot is related to the description of the 12-foot of the body in relation to the 12-foot of the macrocosm, particularly the months of the year and the solar nodes, etc. But we can also see down here that much earlier than this, 1500 years before that, the Ebers Papyrus was saying the same thing, that there are 12 vessels in the human body and qi is flowing through that, and all functional processes of the body are governed by those vessels. And the most important concept in Chinese medicine is harmony or balance, which means whatever we do, we're not trying to suppress symptoms. We are not trying to shut down directly necessarily viruses and bacteria, even though we have an arsenal at our disposal that can achieve that. But it's never forgetting in that process the self-regulating processes of the human body, meaning like the body, whether it's a temperature or a virus or emotional stimulus, pulls us off balance, off center, and then the body has a natural tendency to bring it back center. And so that's why, there is this fascination with the center in Chinese culture. China is called Zhongguo, the country of the center. Chinese medicine is called Zhongyi, which is the medicine of the center, not just the medicine of China. But that is sort of what we're trying to do. Now, more specifically, of the many chronic things that I believe Chinese herbal medicine can treat, um, let's look at, for practical purposes here, at the degenerative disorders of the nervous system. And from what I see again and again in Lyme disease patients, multiple sclerosis patients, Parkinson's patients, and also ALS patients, I, of course, have much less experience than you all have, since those kind of ALS patients I don't encounter anywhere near as many as these other diseases I just mentioned. But what I always see is that there's a picture of chronic inflammation. There is some kind of, after years of chronic inflammation, some kind of hyperreactivity of the immune system, triggering autoimmune complexity, where it's not just external inflammation, but the body itself is sort of in freak out mode. And then a certain kind of toxicity, perhaps, whether it's pesticides or radiation or heavy metals or so. Uh, but also sometimes digestive metabolic toxicity that arises from within. And then, very importantly, mitochondrial dysfunction, which has to do with this concept of essence and its ability to self-regulate. When Chinese medicine says essence versus qi, it means we are talking about some kind of battery function in the body that is fueling intelligently self-regulatory processes at every place in the cell and everywhere in the body, including on a mental, emotional level. From a Chinese medicine perspective, we of course have a 2,500-year-old language sounds antiquated, but can be translated into these terms that we just looked at. So we have, as yin yang is mostly one component of that is excess and deficiency, meaning excess, there's things that don't belong in the body that need to be expelled. Deficiency are things that are not enough of in the body that need to be tonified. And particularly for neurological patients, both of these need to be considered at the same time at all times of the treatment from our perspective. And so the inflammatory part we call wind, the circulatory issues that are always involved we call blood stasis, and then certain metabolites, particularly important in Alzheimer's, for instance, and also Parkinson's, that metabolites not draining out from the brain. And we call that phlegm occluding the orifice of the heart. And then the autoimmune part we often call a yin deficiency. Yang deficiency means not enough action in certain areas, and yin deficiency means there is not enough ability to control the activity of the body. So when there's hyperactivity of the immune system, this is often diagnosed as a yin deficiency. And then, as I said, this kind of essence, Jing essence deficiency, I would think is primarily an ancient term for mitochondrial dysfunction. And that is important because it's the mitochondria are only as of recently really coming into becoming a focal point of Western research, whereas Chinese medicine, in very, of course, general terms, has been talking about this for thousands of years. So here's pre-medical, like probably 500 BC. The main expert on the Guanzi is at Brown University, my friend, Professor Harold Roth, who has been translating a lot of these texts into English. So mostly here, the inward training of the Guanzi chapter is meditation manual. But from my perspective, it is already before Chinese medicine came into being several hundred years later in the form of the Yellow Emperor's classical medicine. It is talking about this essence, and it's as a type of vital force that generates everything in the body. And then that is very much keyed into um, the emotions. This is the relationship of why stress would harm the mitochondria, is because it triggers this not tranquil emotions, and with it, that was an ancient focus. Consciousness governed energy, energy governs physical structure. So the first solution in medicine, particularly if you don't have a whole pharmacy at your disposal, you use the control of your heart, control of your mind, control of your emotions. So meditation, very important. In Chinese medicine, this elusive essence is symbolically, I should say, stored in the kidneys or the lower dantian, as we call that, or the Mingmen, the vital gate of life, which is sort of in the below the belly button area in the front, and then in the opposite of that in the back here in sort of adrenal territory. When Chinese medicine says kidneys, it's really referring to the adrenals and to the glandular system more than the urinary tract. Another very important organ out of the 12 meridian systems that governs essence is the gallbladder. And we have descriptions here also. For instance, here, this point, Zhongdu, gallbladder 32, above the knee on the lateral side of the leg here, that is, describing it here in these 2,000-year-old acupuncture texts as sort of an invasion of treats, invasion of cold influences, but that specifically affect the interstitial spaces of the connective tissue, causing tendon B, which is atrophy, numbness, and lack of control, of motor control over that. So whether it's MS, Parkinson's, or ALS, those are the kinds of things you look for. It's always, as a sinologist, my job, and as a clinician at the same time, is to translate this ancient language into modern times and make this technology understandable from a modern perspective. So yeah, here's further description in the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's uh, classic itself, about what amounts to mitochondrial action over. Forgive me, please, that this is all Chinese here, because I sometimes lecture to Chinese audiences. And so I was putting slides together here from different slideshows. But this just as an evidence that we have discussion of what amounts to mitochondrial uh, effect on muscular and neuromotor function in the body. Now coming to mitochondria would belong to, in essence, belong to the realm of deficiency. There's not enough of something, not enough battery power that needs to be tonified. But then Chinese medicine, of course, is a pandemic medicine. The average Chinese person wouldn't go to the doctor until it was life-threatening. And so you have 2,000 years of history of using Chinese herbs to treat severe inflammation, particularly things like malaria, dengue fever, schistosomiasis, typhoid fever, Q fever, and things like Lyme disease and COVID. So here is just some of these doctors from the so-called fever and epidemic school that written multiple books on treating that in inflammation. whether they are viral or spirochetal or, of course, bacterial, uh, really in a certain way. So we have lots of historical accounts, of severe pandemics with millions of dead people in certain cities in China where villages that were treated with Chinese medicine had a much lower death rate. So here's sort of what's particular interest that at the early 1800s, we have a culmination of two different theories that I find are particularly useful for us because it combines deficiency in excess treatment that need to be utilized for chronically inflamed people with autoimmune sequela, and that is the what's called fuxie theory, the submerged pathogen theory, meaning that there is chronic inflammation in the body that you cannot wipe out with a week of antibiotics or a week of super strong antiviral or antispirochetal or antibacterial herbs. Um, but that kind of becomes recalcitrant in the body and then becomes like glue, and developing strategies for that. So very important focus there was you need to attack the pathogens directly, but most importantly, you need to support the righteous qi. So this is whether it's cancer treatment or any kind of chronic disease, this is a specialty of Chinese medicine that there is 2000 plus years of elaborate combination of herbs that not just attack a pathogen and diminish immune system function in that process, like antibiotics would, from our perspective at least, potentially do that, particularly if they apply it for long periods of time. But that you always fuzheng, you always and yang yin, you always support whatever qi is deficient or blood is deficient or essence is deficient or yang is deficient. Those are all symbolic terms that talk about certain hormonal deficiencies and mitochondrial deficiencies. So Chinese medicine very good at getting the best of both worlds, where you're attacking a pathogen that's recalcitrant, but because it needs to be administered over long periods of time, you combine it with other herbs that at the same time uh, prevent your immune system from sustaining harm. So yeah, here are more translations from that book from Jiang Baosu's book from the 1840s on pathogen submersion. I've also made this into a PDF, so if any of you have interest in having that as a reference, I will send Dr. Cowden the PDF at the end here. Another thing that I've kind of specialized for 25 years on is so-called GU syndrome, which is also something that's been mentioned in the literature for 2000 years, and is got revived in the early 1800s along with that submerged possession theory. And I think it's uniquely suited for the diseases of our time, where people are both chronically inflamed and they have autoimmune complications, and they are deficient in many ways at the same time, and you need to treat them over long periods of time. Lyme disease patients, but probably the best kind of example. I've written multiple articles starting in the 1990s about this GU syndrome that even in Chinese medicine is not that well known, because in communist China, anything that smacks sort of quackery or feudal superstition, they call it, and black magic and things like this, they of course I here focus on the herbal approach, not on some kind of other kinds of shamanic exorcism part of that. But because of that, this is basically, you don't get up to the present day. There is no training in Chinese medicine universities that even mention GU syndrome, but is extremely valuable modality. And here is a great quote, is because we see that in Lyme disease approaches, even in so-called integrative ones that we have uh, at best like multiple years of antibiotic therapy. But there is this idea, that we've identified the pathogen and now we can just pluck it out. You just take several weeks of antibiotics, maybe if it's really recalcitrant, up to several years. But you can remove the pearl from the flower, meaning you just identify it and then you pluck it out and you're good as new. Whereas here, the description of these goose syndrome toxins, based on this 18 quote from the 1800s, is the good toxins that have entered the core of a person's being can be compared to oil seeping into flour. It is everywhere and cannot be separated out. So to think of a gallon of oil going into a sack of flour, once they mixed up, you can't remove it like a pearl. It's part of your own system, and you need to have some long-term plan to separate the two. And so there is very concrete methods, and we'll want to talk about how we can utilize those methods here. Um, so yeah, so here we have, of course, lots of studies about how parasitic organisms can interfere with the immune system, and just as several examples. Um, and you are all much more familiar than me with these kinds of graphs here of the complicated, in this case, uh, parasitic infestation with worms and how it gets super complex interaction with the immune system immediately. So this is what I'm imagining is happening with Lyme patients also, and which is often the prerequisite, I think, for further developments toward rheumatoid arthritis or MS or Parkinson's. I'm not quite sure about ALS, but is also a similar process. I think that there is this incredibly complex, originally there was something inflamed, there's something deficient. Now the body, oil seeping into flour, there's this very complex reaction in the body to some inflammatory pathogen that cannot be properly diagnosed. One additional, we don't have time much to talk about that here, is the originally, where does essence come from, gets replenished in the body, comes from grain. And nowadays we live in the no gluten zone because of glyphosate, I believe. So very interesting that we have here a text from the 4th century BC where it says, we have all life force comes, all nutrition comes from the grain, but also these kind of goo toxins, they can also originate from contaminated, moldy grain. Of course, in modern times, it's through chemicals that this might arise. So I think glyphosate is partly to blame as a broad spectrum antibiotic and originally demineralizing agent that was invented to originally clean your water heater, I think in Switzerland in the 1950s, and then only later repurposed to become a pesticide, and majorly messes with all kinds of systems in the body. So here are just sort of, the descriptions of, as an agrarian society, how important a grain, not just rice, but wheat and sorghum and millet, and particularly were the staple food of ancient China, and how, from a medical perspective, healthy grain is so important. And that is now polluted, of course, and that's why uh, colleagues such as Dr. Zach Bush or so, literally quit their job and said we have to work on the microbiome of the soil because that is our entire health depends on that. So goose syndrome is uh, yeah is has these characteristics that are spelled out here more in detail. There are different categories that go across all systems in the body that start in the digestion, but particularly affect the neuromuscular system, mental emotional function. And there are two types of Gut syndrome, some of them more digestive, some of them more nervous system oriented. We, of course, here in the context of this presentation, more interested in the neuromuscular version. So here are some constitutional symptoms. How do we diagnose somebody like this? Is, of course, for Chinese medicine practitioners who do not have tests available in the Western medicine system, like mitochondrial test, for instance. Um, so here is a list of examples. It doesn't need to be limited to that of potential digestive symptoms of chronically inflamed patients. And then very in the neurological symptoms here, including the paralysis and numbness and muscle weakness we have in ALS, but also in other neurodegenerative diseases. Um, Mental emotional symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, even kind of mental disease, certainly brain fog, so very suitable for Lyme disease. Um, and then principles, just like we said, you got to treat the residual, whether you can see it or not in any test. You want to treat residual inflammation that is always in the background. You want to subdue the autoimmune overreaction of the body, and you want to recharge the body's self-defense batteries. Interesting here that ginseng, this is Panax ginseng, not the American ginseng or the Siberian ginseng, is originally contraindicated in gut treatment because it tonifies not just your body, but any kind of inflammatory pathogens. So that is an important insight here from the 1800s that's helpful. So mystery patients, ALS certainly qualifies. We have to treat people for a long time and combine excess and deficiency symptoms. Here are different categories after analyzing hundreds of anti-goo formulas, disperse and kill goo toxins, whether they are mold or spirochetal or viral or other, with this category of herbs. So we have things like perilla leaf or mint, and particularly lonicera and forsythia here. We have herbs that are tonic to the qi, which includes licorice, for instance, or astragalus, but that at the same time do not tonify parasites. And then we have so-called blood tonics, Angelica sinensis and ligusticum, that are important for blood circulation, including to the brain, but that at the same time are also aromatic and antiparasitic at the same time. Right? We always want to, this is sort of what qi and blood tonics from a Western perspective, they would be building up white blood cells and killer cells, T cells, to help defend chronically inflamed people. And then we have anti-autoimmune yin tonics here that at the same time calm the spirit, because these people definitely have anxiety and tremors and etc. And then we have herbs that directly kill parasites, including garlic, including wormwood, including clove, those kinds of things. And then we have herbs that move qi in blood that, from a Western perspective, we would say they break up biofilm. And then we combine this in formulas that do all of these things at the same time. So the very first remedy I made 17 years ago in the Classical Pearl series is Thunder Pearls. It has these ingredients. These 5 categories are all represented. This is more for a digestive kind of picture, but can be used for really all kinds of chronic inflammation. These are originally sort of typical symptoms, particularly this kind of I want my life back. I never felt like this before. I was athletic. I don't know what's happening to me. Nothing is helping. That's sort of what this remedy was made for. And the from a Western perspective, here are sort of different categories of what this can be used for: protozoan infections, yeast infections, particularly, but really also the viral and spirochetal ones. So, prominent herbs in here are honeysuckle, one of my favorite, very food grade kind of antiviral, anti-spirochetal herbs. Angelica dohurica, very good long-term herb for yeast treatment. Then Solomon seal, Polygonatum root, which my teacher's teacher was taking a little bite of. You see him here in the upper right category. He lived in the early 1900s, was a Taoist monk, was sort of stabilize blood sugar, but also was an anti-parasite herb that you could safely take every single day. And here we have a fern root called guanzhong, Rhizoma dryopteris, which is was particularly important during COVID and SARS. So it's anti-influenza, anti-COVID, anti-SARS, but also very important for Lyme disease, cancer, and it's part of these thunder pearls. Um, More relevant now is the lightning pearls, which is the second formula I produced based on the same principle. We probably have 20% of the same herbs in here, but we have 100% of the same five categories I mentioned. But these herbs are more suitable for chronic inflammation of the nervous system that at the same time are safe and suitable for long-term use. One important herb here is the root of the root bark of the Siberian ginseng, as it grows in southern China, called Nanwujia or Wujiapi. Acanthopanax is a Latin term, which is particularly good for inflammatory processes in immune deficient people, patients that suffer from numbness and paralysis of the connective tissue. So suitable for our purposes here. The same is true for the particularly the wild growing red variety of the Lilium brownie, which is very hard to find, even in China, and you need to go high up into the mountains. And here's the teasel root that's part of this formula, which is naturopaths on the East Coast primarily use that as their prime herb in Lyme disease. And of course, we have wormwood, uh, and we have smilax, which here is my teacher's teacher in herbal uh, tradition that used that to treat syphilis, which is, of course, like Lyme disease, a spirochete. Icarus is a common herb that, particularly when the brain is involved, can be used for long-term therapy for mental clarity. And ginkgo leaf, of course, for circulation and antiparasitic activity. And so we have the same thing, typical symptoms, particularly at the beginning of the disease. Here are sort of examples of Western diseases, and particularly use that for Lyme disease and fibromyalgia, but also people with chronic and constant herpes outbreaks, very important for long COVID treatment. But then very important for circulation, what I would do is what I recommend is this pairing of this formula, which is already has 15 herbs in it, lightning pearls, that can be alternated with thunder pearls of a even more tonic or warming, we would call it energetically, and immune regulating formulas that have cinnamon in it and that help circulation to the brain in particular. So the oldest formula and most famous formula from a book from 1850 years ago is Guizhitang cinnamon decoction that has five different herbs in it, including licorice, including particular ginger, including dates, including cinnamon twig, of course. Here is the peony root, which is important for this formula. That is, again, one needs to go through tremendous effort to get away from the industrial production of this important herb in Chinese medicine to find this biodynamic kind of super old school way of producing that. So classical pearls makes this remedy as it was formulated 2,000 years ago, but here is sort of my version after almost 40 years in the profession to kind of make it more suitable for modern patients, particularly with allergic tendencies, whether it's mild like food allergies or more severe like in MS. This remedy brings circulation to the brain and the extremities. Here is sort of a historical introduction. Here are potential symptoms from a Chinese medicine perspective. Here are sort of more Western medicine examples, what you can use it for, a very wide way of being able to, like Crohn's disease, for instance, would be a good application. And here, very relevant for us for today, is the evergreen pearls, which is made for post-stroke recovery, dementia prevention, but in essence, using cinnamon remedies to bring circulation to the brain, based again on an 1850-year-old remedy called Dangui Sunitang, full four cold extremities decoction. So here, with my modifications for make it particularly suitable for brain health and to make it safe for long-term use. Yeah, we have Oncaria in here, very neurological herb. Here's a Western description of that herb in particular. We have, once again, these descriptions of what this formula does and what can be used for. And then finally, we have herbs that drain metabolites from the brain. That would be the Pinellia family of herbs, particularly balance pearls, as the name says, is made for people who have balance problems, whether that's in Parkinson's, MS, or ALS. And then we would combine these remedies in this particular fashion. Here, another herb that works just like Pinellia is avodia, that is here in the ginkgo pearls, a remedy I use from everything from Parkinson's to brain cancer, even, particularly when nausea and headache is involved. This is a potential remedy as well. So here you can see a 3,500-year-old graph of the name of this herb, where you can literally see it's a sick person that grabs his or her head and go like, what's wrong with my head? So use it for headache, but you can also use it for other kind of brain issues. And you can see here, it's the only Chinese herb that contains small amounts of DMT in it. So definitely something that will affect directly the blood-brain barrier. So here, most important, we've been working up to that and want to make sure we see that, is for practical purposes, how do we combine these things is in this way, for instance, treatment protocol for people with, for instance, Lyme disease, or I would say more long-term sequela of acute Lyme. Of course, this is not so suitable for acute Lyme, but MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and perhaps ALS is this kind of combination of using 3 capsules of the cinnamon pearls, 2 capsules of the lightning pearls, and 1 capsule of the balance pearls in the morning with a glass of water, and then again in the late afternoon or evening, kind of then alternated with a similar approach where the cinnamon is swapped for the evergreen pearls. So you're getting, and then every 3 months or so, we are switching the lightning pearls out for thunder pearls and the balance pearls out for ginkgo pearls, simply because you always, the body, otherwise, that with Western medication as well will fatigue. Even if something works at first, it will stop working at a particular point. The body will get tired of that. So this is sort of like a practical way of working with these herbs to treat excess and deficiency, the chronic inflammation, as well as the mitochondrial dysfunction, as well as any kind of toxicity, as well as any kind of metabolic uh, overwhelm of the brain there in a sustainable and safe way. How do you order these pearls or products? They are made from medical practitioners, licensed medical practitioners only. 95% of our customers, of course, Chinese medicine practitioners, but you can, as MDs or NDs or chiropractors, uh, uh, we sell that as well. So here is sort of instructions on how to register, and then also for free download this 200-page manual that introduces in detail, and once again, these remedies I just discussed, but there are 55 other remedies we didn't discuss that are also with an in the 25-page index in the back with Western medicine diseases is also there.